Rumors usually start small. A quiet message here, a confused officer there, a random sensor alert blinking for just a second before vanishing. Most of the time, these things get ignored. Space is huge, signals bounce around strangely, and people often imagine things when they're tired on night duty. That's what the Empire believed at first. It was easier to think that the border officers were mistaken than to imagine something unusual happening near Earth of all places. But these rumors didn't fade away. In fact, they kept growing. It began with a patrol team stationed far from the Empire's center, near the outer routes where traffic was rare. They had sent a short report, barely a paragraph, saying their scanners picked up a large moving shape that didn't match any known ship. No engine glow, no energy trail, no identification tag. Just a smooth outline moving slowly across the dark. When the higher officials read the report, they shrugged. Maybe the scanner glitched. Maybe it was a broken asteroid fragment. Maybe the officer writing the report was simply bored and wanted attention. A week later, another report arrived from a completely different region. This time, a small merchant vessel claimed something passed them without making any sound or light. They described it as a dark shadow sliding through space like it was alive. They said it didn't emit any heat, didn't respond to hails, and didn't appear to be using any propulsion that their instruments could detect. Empire analysts laughed at first. A silent shadow in space? It sounded like a campfire ghost story, not a real threat. Still, the analysts collected the data, stored it in the archives, and moved on. Then a third report came. This one was more serious. A drone station, unmanned and extremely reliable, recorded a brief but clear image of a large vessel. It wasn't sharp, but the outline was unmistakable. The edges looked too clean, too smooth, like it was built with a different design philosophy. There were no exhaust flares, no glowing reactor core, nothing that looked familiar. It glided past the drone's camera as if it didn't even notice it. Now, the analysts stopped laughing. They didn't raise an alarm yet, but they marked the file for closer review. The problem was that the Empire had hundreds of small threats to handle everyday border disputes. Pirate groups, unstable planets. So strange sightings were still low on the priority list. But when the fourth, fifth, and sixth reports arrived within a few days, all describing the same shadow vessel, the Empire finally paused. Something didn't add up. The sightings came from different corners of space, yet each description matched the previous ones almost perfectly. A large object, no visible engines, no energy output, smooth shape, and an eerie silence around it. The most worrying detail? Every time someone tried scanning it deeply, the vessel simply faded from detection like it slipped into another layer of space, in the Empire's long history. No ship was known to behave that way. One night, inside a brightly lit control room on the capital's strategic center, a group of senior analysts gathered to review the growing list of sightings. They projected the data on a large holographic screen. Although the recordings were incomplete and sometimes blurry, each one showed the same outline, a long, sleek, curved form almost like a living creature, but clearly mechanical. The head analyst rubbed his eyes, tired and confused. Something felt wrong. The Empire had strict records of every species and the technologies they possessed. They knew which civilizations were advanced and which ones were still developing. They kept a close watch on potential threats. Earth was not on any threat list. Humanity, according to imperial classification, was a middle-level civilization. Talented, curious, and stubborn, yes, but far from being technologically dangerous. The last time the Empire checked, humans were still experimenting with improved drives and small exploration fleets. Nothing they had was even close to the shadow vessel in the recordings. So how could these sightings be connected to Earth? The first answer came accidentally. A border officer, reviewing old logs, found a strange energy pattern from a few months earlier. He compared it with the latest shadow sighting data and realized, with growing worry, that they were nearly identical. He sent his findings quickly to his supervisors. The energy signature didn't match any Empire ship or alien vessel, but there was a small trace, a faint reading. That looked very similar to an older human experiment file stored deep in the Empire archives. When the Empire scientists opened that ancient file, they discovered something fascinating years ago. Humans had been working on a type of drive that used space folding instead of burning fuel. The idea was to move by bending the space ahead of the ship, pulling the vessel forward naturally. At the time, the Empire didn't take it seriously because the human prototypes seemed extremely unstable and unpredictable. They assumed the project would be abandoned. But what if it wasn't? The analysts started connecting dots. The sudden silent appearances. The way the vessel left no trail behind. The smooth movement like it floated on invisible currents. Each detail matched what a perfected version of that human prototype might look like. Inside the central hall, tension grew like smoke in a closed room. Officials whispered to each other, uncomfortable with the idea that humans might have advanced further than expected. The Empire prided itself on knowing everything important happening in the galaxy. But now it seemed something had slipped through their fingers. The next moment that changed everything came from a small listening station on the edge of human territory. Late at night, the station detected a large object entering normal space. A sensor operator watched the screen in disbelief as the image formed. It wasn't sharp, but it was enough. The vessel was huge, silent, and shaped exactly like the rumors described. The operator tried to hail it. No response. They tried scanning it. The scan bounced back uselessly. They tried locking onto it with tracking beams. The beams passed through as if the ship wasn't fully there. Then, without warning, the vessel accelerated gently and disappeared into the starfield, leaving nothing but silence behind. The station sent the recording to Imperial Command. This time, the response was immediate and serious. A meeting was called with high-ranking officials. The atmosphere inside the strategy chamber felt heavy, almost anxious. People walked in quickly, carrying data pads and projection files, whispering possible explanations. Everyone was trying to avoid saying the one thing they were all thinking. What if the humans had done something impossible? The meeting began, and one of the senior analysts spoke first. He explained the sightings, the growing number of identical reports, and the matching energy patterns. He showed the recordings one by one, each confirming that the shadow ship wasn't a random glitch or a merchant mistake. When he finished, the room went quiet. Someone asked, could it be a disguised Empire ship? He shook his head. No Imperial vessels are built like this, and the energy reading doesn't match any of our reactors. Another official suggested it might be a rogue species or a hidden pirate faction. But that theory quickly fell apart. Pirates couldn't hide their energy signatures, and no known species had enough resources to build something so advanced in secret. At last, a younger officer, who had remained quiet until then, said softly, "It matches old human research files." The room froze. People exchanged uneasy glances. It sounded absurd. Humans weren't supposed to have this level of technology. They had been quietly building small exploration ships, trading peacefully, and focusing on developing their own small part of space. But the evidence kept pointing back to Earth. The Empire had two options now: pretend the problem didn't exist, or start investigating seriously before the situation grew out of control. They chose the second. A hidden investigation was ordered. Old files on human technological progress were reopened. Spy drones near Earth were activated. Border stations were instructed to monitor every strange signal. Everything seemed calm for a while. But the quiet only added to the Empire's growing fear. One thing became very clear. The sightings weren't random stories. They weren't sensor errors. Something new was moving through space, something built with a level of skill no one expected from humanity. And the Empire, for the first time in a long time, felt nervous. They didn't want to admit it. But the truth kept echoing inside their minds. Humans were not supposed to have vessels like that, not yet. The shadow in space said otherwise. The first real shock for the Empire didn't come from reports, data files, or old research notes. It came from a moment that no one expected, not even the people standing right in front of it. It happened on a calm day when an Imperial convoy was moving through one of their regular routes. The crew was relaxed, chatting lightly, checking their instruments out of habit more than concern. That route was considered safe, quiet, and predictable. It had been that way for many years. One of the crew members sitting at the front console was half bored, half daydreaming. He had been staring at the empty starfield for hours when something unusual caught his eye. At first, he thought he imagined it a faint curve of darkness that didn't match the background. He blinked a few times, leaned forward, and focused. It was still there. Something was blocking the starlight, moving in a slow, deliberate way. He frowned and ran a quick sensor check. Nothing. The sensors showed empty space. But his eyes told a different story. A few seconds passed before he whispered to the others, "Do you see that?" No one reacted at first. Then one of the others leaned over, squinting at the view. She sat up straight, confused. "It looks like a shadow?" The rest of the crew turned their attention to the front screen. Slowly, a large shape began to appear. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't giving off any lights or signals. It simply slid across the darkness like a smooth, black island floating in the middle of nowhere. The room fell silent, as someone quickly tapped the scanner control. Again, nothing appeared. The vessel was still invisible to their instruments. One of the officers whispered, a little shaky, "Is it cloaked?" "Cloaking doesn't look like this," another replied. "Even cloaked ships disrupt something: heat, particles, distortion. This is different." The shadow vessel was close enough now that its outline became clearer. It had no wings, no visible engines, no large glowing core that most ships needed for travel. Instead, it looked almost alive in its smooth form, like a dark stone. Polished by time and space. Someone tried sending a communication signal. "Unidentified vessel. State your identity." No answer. Another attempt. Nothing. A third attempt, using a different frequency. No response again. The Empire convoy wasn't a war fleet. It was mostly transport units with a few escorts. They weren't expecting trouble, and they didn't know how to respond to something that didn't behave like a normal ship. Their training didn't cover situations like this. Inside the command room, tension grew with every passing second. Then the shadow vessel slowed down, as if observing them. Even though it didn't have any windows or visible sensors, the crew felt like they were being watched, checked, maybe even evaluated. It was an uncomfortable feeling, a quiet pressure that made their hearts beat faster. Someone finally said, "It's too big to be a pirate ship." And no known species uses designs like this. Another officer asked, "Should we signal command?" "Yes," the captain said immediately. "Send everything. Send visual recordings, sensor logs, everything we have." The crew scrambled to prepare the packet, compressing the images and scans into a message. While they worked, the shadow vessel remained still, almost peaceful, almost patient. Then something unexpected happened. The vessel drifted a little closer, but not in a threatening way. It moved as if carried by a soft current, its surface shimmering slightly like heat waves. One crew member leaned closer to the screen. "It's bending the space around it," he whispered. "Look at the stars behind it." They're shifting. The stars behind the vessel were indeed bending ever so slightly, giving the illusion that space was gently rippling around the ship. This wasn't normal. This wasn't known technology. This was something beyond what the Empire had ever studied in detail. The captain decided to try speaking again. Unidentified vessel, this is an Imperial convoy. We request that you identify yourself. Still no answer. One crew member looked uneasy. Maybe it can't communicate on our channels. Or it doesn't want to, someone replied softly. While the crew kept watching, the vessel glided sideways, almost studying the convoy. Its motion was so smooth that it didn't seem mechanical at all. A soft hum passed through the convoy, barely noticeable, like a faraway vibration. The crew felt it more than heard it. Then came the moment that shocked them the most. The convoy's automatic identification system, which constantly scanned for friendly or neutral tags, suddenly flashed. A tiny code appeared on the screen brief, almost like a whisper of data. Origin, human. The room erupted with confused voices. Human? That can't be right. No way humans built this. Check the system. It must be malfunctioning. But the system wasn't malfunctioning. The identification came from the vessel itself, sent as a small burst of encrypted data, just long enough to register, then gone. The crew stared at each other, speechless. This wasn't possible. The Empire had visited Earth dozens of times. They had monitored human technology for years. Humans were still improving their ships, still learning, still exploring step by step. They weren't capable of creating something that could twist space and silence. Sensors, yet the code said it loud and clear. Vessel belonged to humans. The convoy immediately sent the updated message to Imperial Command. This time, they added the identification tag. When the message reached the Empire's central hub, everything changed. The analysts who had been half skeptical about earlier reports now had solid evidence staring them in the face. A human signature on an impossible ship. Inside the capital strategy center, officials gathered again, this time with a sense of urgency. The details were repeated over and over, but no explanation made sense. The Empire had always believed it understood human capabilities. Humans had been growing steadily, yes, but nothing suggested they had jumped ahead by decades or centuries. Some officials said the signature might be fake, forged to cause confusion. But others argued that the movement, the silence, and the space distortion matched the old human research from years ago. Something clicked in their minds. Humans must have continued developing that experiment in secret dot in the middle of all the debate. Another message came in this time from a ship far from the first encounter. They had seen a similar vessel passing through a quiet region near trading lanes. Again, no lights, no engine flare, no sound. Just a silent shape moving between the stars. The sightings were increasing now. The Empire couldn't ignore them anymore. They had to accept what was happening, even if they didn't understand it. Meanwhile, back at the convoy, the crew still watched the vessel closely. They didn't know if it would approach again or leave. The tension remained thick in the air. Then, as quietly as it appeared, the vessel started drifting away. No acceleration, no sound, no reaction. It simply glided backward, almost like it was slipping between thin layers of reality. The stars behind it bent gently again. Then, with a soft ripple, it vanished into the darkness. The convoy stared at the empty space for a long time. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The moment felt unreal, like a dream that was too vivid to forget. The captain finally said, in a low voice, "We need to return. Command will want us back." The crew nodded. Everyone moved with a quiet seriousness now. The excitement was gone, replaced by an uneasy awareness that something enormous had begun. By the time the convoy returned to Imperial space, the story had already spread among the officials. Some were nervous, others skeptical, others curious, but all shared one emotion: surprise. The Empire prided itself on predicting the future, but this time, humanity had done something no one expected. The realization echoed across the halls. Of power. Humans weren't supposed to have vessels like that, but the truth was clear they did. And whatever it meant for the galaxy, the Empire would soon have to face it. For days, the Empire tried to convince itself that the strange vessel seen by the convoy was a one-time event. Maybe a prototype, maybe an experiment that humans somehow managed to launch by chance. But the more they tried to reassure themselves, the more new reports arrived. And each one added pressure they couldn't ignore. Inside the Empire's main research building, deep in a wide circular room filled with memory crystals and old data logs, a group of analysts worked nonstop to connect the clues. The room buzzed with hushed conversations, the clicking of keys, and the soft humming of old machines waking up after years of silence. One of the senior analysts stood in front of a long projection table, flipping through old human research files. The Empire had kept detailed records of human development, mostly because humans were unpredictable in a curious and creative way. They weren't known for building giant fleets or dangerous weapons. They were known for experimenting constantly small ideas, small prototypes. Nothing too alarming. That's why it was strange that the Empire suddenly lost track of what humans had been doing for the last few years. They had been so busy dealing with bigger political matters that they never checked the small changes happening on Earth. As the senior analyst scrolled through the data, he found something interesting: a research report from years ago. It wasn't a big document, just a simple summary from a human lab. It talked about a space-bending drive, something that could fold sections of space to move a vessel without leaving energy trails. The Empire scientists had studied the idea at the time and labeled it too unstable to pursue. They assumed humans would reach the same conclusion and abandon it. But now, reading it again with fresh eyes, the analyst felt uneasy. The silent ship, the bending stars behind it, the lack of heat signatures, all of it matched the early descriptions of the human experiment. It felt like opening a drawer and finding something important that everyone had forgotten existed. He quickly pulled more files from the archives: old spy reports, outdated human technology assessments, recorded interviews, anything related to Earth's research. The more he studied, the clearer the pattern became. Humans had been growing steadily in ways that were easy to overlook. They had stayed quiet, focused, and determined. They didn't ask for help. They didn't boast. They simply worked. The analyst turned toward his team and said quietly, "We've ignored them for too long." While the research team dug deeper, another group of officials met in the Empire's High Council chamber. They sat around a long metallic table shaped like a ring, facing each other with uncertain expressions. None of them wanted to admit what they were thinking, but the sense of worry hung in the room. One official finally broke the silence. "We have multiple sightings from multiple regions. This is no accident." Another nodded slowly, and the vessel clearly identified itself as human. "We can't ignore that." A third added, "If humans have this technology, then they have made a leap far ahead of their projected timeline." Everyone knew what that meant. The Empire had been the strongest power in the galaxy for centuries. They controlled trade routes, regulated research, and influenced smaller civilizations. A sudden technological leap by humanity could shift the balance. But even deeper than fear was confusion. Why hadn't anyone noticed humans reaching this level? To find answers, the Empire launched a deeper investigation. They reactivated old listening posts that monitored human transmissions. They studied traffic logs, space travel records, even old cultural broadcasts from Earth. They wanted to find clues about what humans had been doing in recent years. To their surprise, The signals revealed nothing unusual. No big announcements, no sudden scientific celebrations, no news from Earth about groundbreaking discoveries. Humans acted like everything was normal. They talked about everyday life, shared music and stories, and discussed small progress made in research. Nothing hinted at the creation of a giant, silent vessel capable of bending space. This made the Empire even more nervous. If humans really created such technology, they had done it quietly, too quietly. Meanwhile, far from the Empire's capital, another observation station picked up something important. A long-range scanner detected two small objects traveling together at high speed. The operator zoomed in and froze in shock. They were smaller than the shadow vessel seen earlier, but they had the same shape, the same smooth design, and the same silence around them. The operator checked the sensors 3 times, thinking it must be a glitch. But the vessels remained invisible to scanners, even when they were visible on the screen. He whispered to himself, "They've built more." He immediately sent the recording to the central hub. When the Empire officials played the footage, a quiet panic filled the room. They didn't speak for a long moment. It was impossible to deny it now. Humans weren't experimenting. They had already succeeded. And not just once multiple vessels were moving around the galaxy without anyone noticing. The Council called for every department to report in scientists, strategists, intelligence teams, cultural analysts, communication officers, and exploration experts. Everyone was told to bring whatever information they had about Earth's recent development out as the meeting went on. A younger analyst raised her hand. She had been studying the silent drive concept for years and understood more than most. She explained that a system capable of bending space would need a very stable power source, something humans hadn't officially mastered. But the smooth shape of the ship meant they had found a way to stabilize that power without using heavy machinery. The lack of heat suggested the energy looped internally, not leaking into space. "That means," she said softly, "humans created a completely new type of engine." The room felt colder as her words sank in. Another analyst added, "And the design? It's not made for war. It's too elegant, too quiet, too balanced. It looks like a vessel built for long journeys." The Council exchanged uneasy looks. An advanced ship built for long journeys suggested one thing: exploration. But why would humans explore so quietly? Why hide their progress? Meanwhile, the research team back in the archives finally found something that made everyone lean forward in their seats. It was an encrypted message intercepted 2 years ago, sent between 2 human labs. The Empire system originally marked it as unimportant because it was too short and too scrambled to understand. Now, with new decoding tools, the message became clear. It said, "New prototype functional. Keep silent until confirmed." That one sentence explained everything. Humans had kept their success hidden intentionally. They didn't want attention. They didn't want interference. They wanted to make sure the technology worked before anyone else discovered it. The Empire sat with this realization, feeling strangely unsettled. They were used to being the ones who monitored, controlled, and predicted the progress of others. Now they discovered that humans had been working quietly in the background, making progress faster than anyone expected. Some officials argued that humans might not mean any harm. Humans were known for their curiosity, not aggression. They liked exploring, building, improving. They weren't the type to hide powerful technology unless they felt they had to. Others pointed out that humans might be hiding it because they feared being stopped. The Empire had strict research rules. Humans may have known the Empire wouldn't allow them to experiment freely, so they worked in secret. Both possibilities made sense. Neither was comforting. While everyone debated, a message arrived from a deep space probe. The probe had been drifting quietly near the edge of human territory. It had picked up a soft pulse of energy that matched the silent drive's signature. The pulse seemed like a trail left behind by a vessel that had recently passed through. One council member sighed heavily. They're moving far beyond their usual zones. Another added, if humans are exploring deep space with these vessels, we have no idea how many are out there. The room grew quiet again, got in the middle of all this tension. The Empire finally realized something important. They had misjudged humans. They assumed humans were slow, predictable, and easy to monitor. But humans were adaptable. When they focused on something, they pursued it with determination. They worked quietly, sometimes secretly, but always with purpose. The silent vessels, the bending space, the calm movement, none of it matched the Empire's old image of Earth. Humans had evolved, grown, and changed, all without announcing it to the galaxy dot, and the Empire suddenly understood something that made their skin tighten. They weren't watching humans. Humans had been watching them. The shadow vessels weren't hiding. They were observing, studying reactions, gathering information, and silently moving through space in ways the Empire couldn't detect Dot by the end of that day. Every official knew the truth they had avoided for too long. Humans weren't supposed to have technology like this, but they did, and whatever came next would reshape the entire galaxy. The Empire had always believed it understood how meetings with Earth would go. Humans were known for being polite, curious, and a little stubborn, but never overly bold. They usually asked questions, requested cooperation, and tried to maintain friendly relations. So when the Empire sent a delegation to Earth after the mysterious sightings, they expected a similar experience. They expected worried faces, a long explanation, maybe an apology for misunderstanding or for causing tension. But what they saw on the first day of the meeting wasn't fear or nervousness. It was calm confidence. It wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, steady, and warm. Humans welcomed the delegation with friendly greetings, simple gestures, and peaceful smiles. It almost made the Imperial representatives feel unprepared. Because they had come expecting something more dramatic, the meeting took place in a wide circular room on Earth, surrounded by windows that looked out over trees, gently swaying in the wind. The Empire delegation arrived early, hoping to study the room and gather their thoughts before humans entered. But the moment the first humans stepped in, the atmosphere shifted. Not in a threatening way, more like someone had opened a door and let in fresh air. The humans sat down across from the Empire officials with relaxed postures. They didn't rush to explain anything, nor did they act like they owed anyone an answer. They simply waited for the Empire to speak first, a gesture that surprised the visitors. One of the Imperial officials cleared his throat and began carefully. He explained that the Empire had seen unusual vessels near multiple regions, and that these vessels carried a human signature. He tried not to sound accusing, but the unease in his voice was clear. He asked, very directly, why humans had developed such advanced ships without informing anyone. The human representative listened quietly, nodding in understanding. When the official finished speaking, the human leaned forward slightly and said, "We created those vessels to explore deeper regions of space safely. That's all." The Imperial delegation exchanged glances. They were waiting for a long explanation, a technical breakdown, a project history, anything that might make the situation easier to grasp. But the human representative gave a simple, soft answer, like it was the most natural thing in the world. One of the Empire officials tried again. He spoke in a respectful tone, asking how humans had managed to develop a silent drive system, something that even the Empire had not perfected. The human paused for a moment, searching for the right words. "We studied for many years," he said. "We learned from our failures, tested new ideas, and worked quietly until we were sure everything was safe. We didn't want to rush. We also didn't want to cause panic by announcing something before it was ready." This answer was simple, almost too simple. The Empire delegation wasn't sure how to respond. They couldn't believe that humans had created something so advanced without outside help or special resources. But the tone of the human representative was so plain and honest that it made the officials doubt their own assumptions. Another Imperial member asked if the vessels were designed for war. The question hung in the room for a few seconds before the human responded, shaking his head lightly. No, they're for travel, exploration, and protection if needed. Not for conflict. The Empire officials couldn't hide their relief, although they tried to keep their expressions neutral. It wasn't that they thought humans would start a war. They just feared misunderstanding. The galaxy had seen too many unnecessary conflicts start because one group misunderstood another's intentions. The conversation continued in a steady way. The humans didn't brag about their achievement, nor did they downplay it. They simply explained that Earth wanted to explore beyond familiar paths. They wanted to reach places no one had charted before, study distant stars, and maybe find new worlds that could answer questions humanity had carried for generations. The Empire listened closely. They were used to civilizations seeking power or territory, but humans seemed more interested in discovery and learning. It was refreshing, but also confusing. Why hide such a major breakthrough if their intentions were peaceful? The Imperial group finally asked that exact question. Why all the secrecy? The human representative took a calm breath and answered honestly. Because we weren't sure how other civilizations would react. We didn't want our project to be stopped before it was finished. We needed time to test it, improve it, and make sure it was safe for everyone involved. We didn't hide it because we were planning anything harmful. We hid it because we didn't want pressure, judgment, or interference. This explanation was so human in nature, quiet, thoughtful, cautious. The Empire didn't know whether to feel relieved or embarrassed. They had assumed the worst, while humans were simply trying not to make a mistake. After the response, there was a gentle silence in the room. No tension, no lingering suspicion, just the weight of understanding settling on everyone's shoulders. One Empire official finally spoke in a softer tone. "Why didn't you come to us for support? We could have helped." The human replied with a small smile. "Some journeys are meant to be taken alone. It helps a species grow. It teaches patience and responsibility." The words were simple, but they carried depth. The Empire had never thought about development that way. Most civilizations asked for help when they struggled. Humans chose to face the challenge themselves. When the meeting broke for a short pause, the Empire delegation stepped outside to discuss privately. They stood in a garden area, surrounded by soft wind and distant city sounds. One of them said quietly, "They're not the same species we visited years ago. They've changed." Another replied, "Or maybe they always had this potential, and we just didn't notice." They returned inside to continue the discussion, but the mood had shifted. Now they asked questions with curiosity instead of concern. The humans answered with calmness and humility. Both sides were beginning to understand each other in a way they never had before. By the end of the day, something important became clear. Humans were not hiding secrets to gain power. They were protecting something they believed was meaningful. They weren't trying to intimidate anyone. They were simply stepping into a new chapter of their story. And what stood out most wasn't the vessels, the technology, or the surprise. It was the way humans carried themselves, not boastful, not defensive, just steady. Confident in a quiet way that didn't push anyone away. As the Empire delegation prepared to leave Earth, they felt a mixture of relief and wonder. They realized this wasn't a challenge to their authority. It was an invitation to see humanity differently, not as a small civilization catching up, but as a partner that was growing in its own unique way. When the human representative walked the delegation back to their shuttle, the sunset painted the sky in warm colors. The representative said, "We're not trying to outshine anyone. We're just preparing for the future." The simple honesty in that sentence stayed with the Empire officials long after they left Earth's atmosphere. Once they returned to the capital, the story spread quickly among other civilizations. Everyone expected humans to be nervous, but instead, they stood with calm confidence that left a lasting impression. It wasn't arrogance. It was self-assurance, the kind that comes from working hard, solving problems quietly, and trusting your own progress. Other species began paying attention, not because humans demanded it, but because humans had earned it through their actions. The Empire realized that humanity wasn't trying to become powerful. They were simply refusing to stay small. And that quiet strength, the strength that didn't brag or threaten, was what unsettled them the most. But it was also what earned their respect. And deep inside, the Empire understood a quiet truth. The galaxy had entered a new era, and humans were no longer standing at the edge of it. They were stepping into the center calmly, steadily, and with vessels nobody had expected them to create. For days, people across Earth waited to see what would happen next. News channels played the same short clip again and again, the moment when the human vessel glided past the Empire's border ships without making a sound. Different experts gave different opinions, but one thing was clear to everyone. This was not a normal moment. This was history happening in real time. People felt as if the world was holding its breath. Even those who usually didn't care about space suddenly became curious. Social media was full of questions, theories, jokes, and worries. Some felt proud, some felt nervous, and some just wanted answers. Far away from Earth, deep in space, the Empire was just as restless. Their ships and stations were operating with extra staff. Every watch officer was alert. Every engineer was double-checking sensors and communication lines. Nobody wanted to be the person who missed the next appearance of a human vessel. It had already happened twice in places the Empire considered high security. The idea that a human ship could enter and leave without anyone noticing until it was already gone made many officials uncomfortable. They were used to being the ones who surprised others. Now the situation was reversed. Inside one of the Empire's main command halls, officers kept replaying footage of the silent human ship. They zoomed into every angle, checked every pixel, and compared it with older records. But no matter how much they studied it, the results stayed the same. Humans were far more advanced than the Empire had assumed. Some officers whispered among themselves that maybe Earth had been hiding this technology for years. Others argued that humans must have made a sudden breakthrough. But the truth was still unclear. All they knew was that these new vessels were real. They worked. And they were not something the Empire had an easy answer for. Back on Earth, scientists and engineers continued their work quietly, even though they knew the entire galaxy was watching them. They didn't show off their progress, and they didn't try to intimidate anyone. They were focused on improvement, safety, and preparation. They understood something very simple. When humans step into something new, they do it with care. They had learned from their own history that rushing into things creates problems later. That calm and careful attitude confused the Empire even more. They expected humans to act loud or aggressive after revealing something so powerful. But instead, Earth behaved like a team that simply wanted to do better and protect itself if needed. The Empire sent out more diplomats, and this time the meetings were longer and more serious. They wanted to know how many vessels Earth had built, who controlled them, and what their purpose was. But Earth did not give exact numbers, not because they wanted to hide anything, but because they believed those numbers didn't matter. What mattered was trust, understanding, and the fact that humans were not looking for trouble. They explained their intentions politely. They made it clear that they were not preparing for a galactic conflict. Their main goal was to make sure no one tried to corner them or decide their future for them. They believed every world had the right to grow at its own pace. Even with these calm explanations, the Empire could not shake their uneasy feeling. They had never imagined humans would reach this level of technology. Many of their older records still described Earth as a young, developing world. Now that old information was useless. The humans had moved far ahead while the Empire wasn't looking. The power balance was no longer straightforward. And in the galaxy, whenever something changes suddenly, people react with caution. Slowly, other planets began paying attention too. Some smaller worlds believed this moment could give them hope. If humans could grow and achieve something unexpected, maybe they could too. Others wondered if the Empire would try to control the situation. But surprisingly, the Empire didn't take any drastic actions. They simply watched. They calculated. And they adjusted their behavior. For the first time in a long time, the Empire realized they couldn't act in their usual confident way. They had to rethink how they treated other civilizations. Meanwhile, the human vessel continued its journeys. It appeared on distant scanners, stayed for a while, and then slipped away without creating any trouble. People who saw it up close described it as peaceful and calm. They said the ship didn't look threatening, just incredibly advanced, like something built with a purpose beyond war or show. The silence of the ship fascinated everyone. It seemed to move with intention, not with force. Even inside the Empire, as officers watched these new vessels on their screens, their fear started turning into something else: respect. They didn't want to admit it openly, but they knew it was true. Humanity had earned a place among major galactic powers, not by demanding it, but by quietly proving their capability. The Empire had always respected strength, but now they were learning to respect quiet confidence as well. On Earth, things felt different too. People went about their everyday lives, going to work, taking care of family, meeting friends, but deep inside, they felt a sense of pride they couldn't fully explain. For decades, humans had watched the galaxy from a distance, treated as newcomers who needed guidance. But now, humans were no longer the beginners. They were innovators, explorers, and creators. They had stepped onto the galactic stage in a way no one expected. There were moments of worry too. Some people wondered if the Empire would react badly in the future. Others wondered if humans should build even stronger defenses. But most believed that progress was better than fear. They trusted that careful actions and calm thinking would keep the galaxy peaceful. They trusted that humanity's intentions were good, and their commitment to fairness would show through their actions. As days turned into weeks, a new understanding started forming in the galaxy. Whenever an alien spoke about humans, the tone was no longer casual or dismissive. There was always a hint of caution, a bit of curiosity, and sometimes even admiration. The phrase, "humans weren't supposed to have vessels like that," became almost a common saying, half surprise, half respect. The Empire, in particular, changed its approach. Instead of looking at Earth as a small world on the edge of space, they started seeing it as a rising force, one with ideas, principles, and capabilities worth paying attention to. Their officers adjusted training programs. Their scientists began studying human breakthroughs, and their leaders reshaped their policies. They understood that ignoring humanity was no longer possible. In a quiet meeting room on Earth, leaders gathered to discuss the next steps. Their main belief was simple: humanity should grow, but not through force. They would help where they could, share knowledge when it felt safe, and protect their home without threatening others. They wanted the galaxy to understand that humans were not here to cause fear. They were here to contribute, learn, and build a better future. The story of how the Empire reacted spread everywhere, and it became a reminder for many civilizations. It showed that assumptions can be wrong. It showed that progress can come from places no one expects. And it showed that the galaxy is always changing, always growing, always full of surprises. With time, The silent human vessels became a symbol of something bigger, human potential. They represented patience, effort, and the belief that no one should be underestimated. Even the Empire, once shocked and uneasy, eventually accepted this new reality with a calmer mind. Humanity didn't shout or force its way forward. They simply moved with steady steps, one improvement at a time, until the galaxy had no choice but to take notice. And just like that, a new balance of power formed, not through conflict, but through innovation and quiet strength. The Empire never forgot the moment they first saw the human vessel. They never forgot how it made them feel, confused, surprised, and respectful all at once. And from that point on, they treated Earth differently. Not as a junior civilization, not as a weaker world, but as a partner worth understanding. In the end, the galaxy learned one important lesson. Never judge a world by old records. Never assume someone hasn't grown simply because you weren't watching. And never underestimate humanity, because humans have a way of surprising everyone, even the greatest empires.